This is Public Research. I'm Daniel Schwartz. People are saying he's going to run for president.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he will?
He seems to be setting himself up to do it.
My strong impression was that Trump was more a hostage than a sovereign decision maker in this.
Tucker Carlson is at the top of America's podcast charts.
I just want to say, I think you are the most important popular historian working in the United States today.
Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War.
Promoting Holocaust deniers, Hitler fans, and telling millions Donald Trump has betrayed America, been taken hostage by Israel, and is now their mere pawn, doing Israel's bidding in the Middle East. The former Fox host has traded in his old concern about immigration for a more abiding and relentless new obsession with attacking Israel and Jews. And speculation is rising that the biggest booster of anti-Semitism, arguably in America today, is mulling a run for president in 2028.
For me, when I saw those comments from Tucker, it seemed to me to be I think I absolutely know what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
He's running for president, Kara.
My guest today is Jason Zengerle, the author of the definitive book on the life and times of Tucker Carlson, Hated by All the Right People, Tucker Carlson, and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind.
Tucker's whole worldview is so much colored now by who his enemies dislike. And I think, a guy like Tate, all the right people hate him. And so Tucker likes him.
Zengerle is a staff writer at The New Yorker, a Toner Prize-winning political journalist, and joins me to discuss how the bow-tie-wearing George Will conservative of the early 2000s has transformed into the Holocaust denial-promoting Father Coughlin of our times.
Tucker sort of started to wonder, okay, they were wrong about Iraq. What else were they wrong about? And, at the Weekly Standard, where Tucker had worked before CNN, one of their biggest projects was reading Pat Buchanan out of the conservative movement. And so I think Tucker started to say, okay, not only what were these people I admired, what were they wrong about? And what are these people I've been told are wrong about everything? What are they right about? And Buchanan became this really, important figure to him, and not just on foreign policy. And I think a lot of the stuff you see today with the Jewish, question, a lot of that goes back to Buchanan.
All that and more on today's episode of Public Research. Jason Zengerle is a staff writer at The New Yorker, a Toner Prize-winning political journalist, and the author of Hated by All the Right People, Tucker Carlson, and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind, the most serious biography ever written about one of the most dangerous and sadly influential figures in America today, Tucker Carlson. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I finished the book today. The ending paragraph left me somewhat shook, and I thought it was very well done, and I thought it might be a good place to start, so I'll read it if you don't mind.
No.
30 years ago, as a young man, Carlson liked to make sport of Joseph Sobran, the once great conservative writer who'd been banished from the kingdom of respectability on account of his descent into anti-Semitism and racism. Carlson had joked that he'd run into a rambling, disheveled Sobran at a suburban Denny's, where he sat by himself in a booth, holding court to an audience of no one. It is tempting to think that Carlson has followed in Sobran's ignominious footsteps, that he has suffered the same fate as the man he once ridiculed. Except Carlson is not sitting in an empty restaurant booth. He has the ears of heads of state and billionaires. He is selling out basketball arenas and constantly streaming onto our phones. He has descended into madness, but he is speaking to millions. I heard that and I just it's the kind of paragraph you just have to sit with for a while because it's so true and so scary. I just wanted to praise you on that.
Well, hey, thanks. I'll take it.
It reiterates why we have to pay attention to this guy. And I loathe listening to him, but we have to. We have to.
Yeah. Well, that was the idea behind the book, that you can't afford to ignore him at this point.
So I see the book as a biography of two people. The bow tie guy,
mm-hmm.
and then the evil Tucker. I didn't really know the bow tie guy that much. I grew up without cable, so I didn't see him that much. But I saw his look.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what was he like in his bow tie era, sort of before he leaves Crossfire and the magazine era?
Yeah, I mean, so I first got to know Tucker just as a journalist, as not personally, I mean, a little bit personally, but like more just as, a sort of a figure, was back when he was a magazine journalist, when he was at the Weekly Standard, which is, where he, for all intents and purposes, kind of started his journalism career. He was doing some stuff before that, but that was his big break. He was on the inaugural staff of the Standard, which launched in 1995, and he was sort of one of the, 2 or 3 junior writers. And very quickly established himself as a real star in print journalism. Just an excellent writer, really good reporter, and a gutsy journalist, in the sense that even though he was writing for a conservative publication, he was not afraid to take on kind of sacred cows of the conservative movement. Grover Norquist was like an early target of his. He wrote a really kind of devastating hit piece on Norquist, and had this sort of like public feud with him, which was quite entertaining. I mean, it involved Tucker dumping a Bloody Mary on Grover Norquist's head at a banquet. I think at a Heritage Foundation banquet. I think it was a Heritage Foundation. It may have been AEI. Anyway, conservative think tank.
What was the hit piece? What was the?
It was, Norquist at that time was probably like the most important figure in the conservative movement, and that he ran this Wednesday morning meeting where all of sort of the, conservative journalists and conservative interest group heads and people from the Hill, people from, the House where Newt Gingrich was speaker, came to kind of, get their marching orders and their, coordinate their messages. And Grover was portraying himself as this movement leader, and Tucker's piece kind of revealed him to be, he's a lobbyist as well, and he's basically selling access to this meeting and to this movement, and just kind of revealed him to be this, kind of, grubby operator. So there was that. I mean, he eventually got sort of plucked from the Standard to write for bigger, less political but glossier publications like New York Magazine, and then Talk Magazine, which was founded by Tina Brown after she left the New Yorker. She founded this magazine, Talk, which, is long gone, but at the time was sort of
legendary.
the hottest magazine around. And he and Jake Tapper were the two political writers for Talk. And Tucker wrote this profile of George W. Bush. I think it was probably been in 1999, maybe 2000, but at the outset of the 2000 presidential campaign, when Bush was the Republican frontrunner. And Tucker's piece was subtle, but it was quite critical of Bush, and kind of revealed the things about him that made him such a disastrous president, kind of his like ignorance, his callousness, his stubbornness. Like, it was all in the piece. There was this very famous episode in the piece where Tucker had a scene in which he was talking to Bush about a woman named Carla Faye Tucker, who was on death row in Texas. I think she'd like killed her abusive husband or boyfriend or something. And she became kind of a cause celeb. Larry King had gone down to Texas to do an interview with her. There were all these protests. Bush had eventually signed her death warrant. She was executed. Tucker was asking him about that. And Bush said something about, that she had an audience with him asking for, clemency. And Tucker's just saying, what did she say to you? And Bush like mocked her, saying, please don't kill me. And it was just kind of like a shocking scene. And Bush's people like were trying to deny that he'd said it, and they were accusing Tucker that he made it up, sort of a whisper campaign saying he'd made it up. And I mean, and he stood by it and sort of took the heat. And, he was just someone that you admired as a print journalist. And, at the same time he was doing TV and was making a bit of a name for himself there. This was the early days of both Fox and MSNBC. So suddenly there was a ton of airtime that the cable news channels needed to fill. And so it was really easy to get on TV. I mean, even I was like an intern at the New Republic then, and even like TNR interns would get, opportunities to go on TV just because they would take anyone. And Tucker was really good at it. And, he had this bow tie, like you mentioned. He was kind of, he looked like a prep schooler. He had the haircut, and he was very funny and quick on his feet and could basically offer a take on anything. So he was really successful in television. And eventually, he decided to leave print journalism to do cable news, and he got a job at CNN. He hosted a show that no one watched called the Spin Room for a little while with Bill Press, and then eventually he got the seat on Crossfire, which at the time was probably like the most venerable political debate show on cable news, and he was occupying one of the chairs on the right. There was a host on the right, a host on the left, and he was on the right. And I think he was probably maybe in his early 30s at that point. So he was,
because I know it was Buchanan in the 80s.
Yeah.
Who do you know who it was he was replacing in the early 2000s?
Yeah, so it was Mary Matlin.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason he was replacing her was because she was going to work in the Bush White House.
James Carville's
wife. And then James Carville, after Matlin left and Tucker came on, eventually James Carville became one of the liberal hosts. It was James Carville and Paul Begala were the two liberal hosts, and then the two conservative hosts were Tucker and Bob Novak. Novak had been the host for a long time. And, the liberal host used to be Michael Kinsley, was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
that was that CIA guy or something, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. What is? Oh gosh, I forget his name. Yeah. But when they brought on Carville and Begala, like they brought on these like sort of Democratic hacks, right? Mm-hmm. And they weren't like intellectuals. Like Kinsley would deviate from the Democratic Party line all the time. I mean, Carville and Begala, of course, would not do that. And that actually kind of created this weird pressure on Tucker to become a Republican hack, which is not what he was in print. I mean, he was someone who was willing to go after the Republican frontrunner, willing to go after Grover Norquist. Like in his Crossfire role, he really had to kind of hew to GOP talking points because the show wouldn't work. I mean, he couldn't like agree with Begala and Carville, right? So you just kind of had like Democratic hacks like yelling at Republican hacks. And Novak actually was sort of free to kind of still not totally toe the party line. Like he was not an interventionist, for instance. Like he was kind of an isolationist when it came to foreign policy, and definitely has some interesting views about Israel. And so Tucker kind of became sort of this de facto Republican kind of hack talking head. And it wound up having to support on the air the run up to the war in Iraq and everything we're seeing today is kind of a fallout from that.
I feel bad to mention it because God, I wish he was still alive, and I'm sure he would regret this, but Christopher Hitchens, I don't know, maybe you're aware of this, one of his last interviews when he had cancer, I think, or no, actually, it wasn't when he had cancer, but it was like this.
It was early, yeah. I think I know what you're talking about.
You know the one I'm talking about? It's this great, like, C-SPAN interview. It's, like, super long, amazing interview at his apartment, I think. And he brings up Tucker Carlson. And he says, I always told him he should go back to writing. He was a great writer. He had all this praise for Tucker. And that, I mean...
We picked the favorite writers we had from the other side to see whether we could get the cream of left-right polemical writing.
And who?
So I must have picked Tucker.
Why?
Do you know, I can't remember what the piece is now. I hope he's not watching. Although this is pre-9/11, it seems like so long ago to me. I hope Tucker will forgive if I say I don't remember which piece we picked from him.
And another book I want to...
But I do remember telling Tucker I wish he wouldn't give up writing for TV. And I hope he sometimes hears the distant, hollow echo of my voice. Tucker, don't do that.
And Christopher Hitchens was a guy who could pick up on, like, when people had weird attitudes towards Jews. He had pretty good radar for that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think about what he would have thought about Tucker today. It's just...
Yeah. I hadn't thought about the Jewish angle. Actually, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, that is. I mean, no, Tucker was this, cautionary tale among a lot of writers. I mean, long before any of the stuff today, he was sort of this cautionary tale of like this really talented writer who got kind of lured by the siren song of television, and it's what a shame and what a loss to the sort of the print journalism world that he's no longer in it.
So, but because I didn't see him on CNN, tell me, what was that Tucker like? How similar was he like in 2003 or 2004 to what we would see in 2020 or 2023?
I mean, similar affect. I mean, the bow tie was, a big part of it, and he obviously ditched that eventually. But funny, quick on his feet. His political views were far more conventional, and I think that was because of the role he was playing. I mean, you would never, the Tucker Carlson on CNN in 2003 would never have been denouncing a Republican president. That's for certain. But everything else. It was, it's sort of it's within the ballpark. He had sort of there was a glibness to him. I mean, I think he seems more unwell today, if that's a fair way to put it. I mean, the kind of that crazy laugh, that hyena laugh that he has.
Was he doing that back then?
Not like he does today. I mean, it was there. I mean, it was still like kind of a noticeable laugh, but it wasn't as like unsettling as it is today.
Was he doing, one of the, I think when I really grew, I mean, there were lots of points where I was like, wow, this guy's really disgusting. But one of those moments, I don't know if you remember, was back when he was on Fox, and he was doing something about Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart had been like doing something like totally admirable, advocating for 9/11 firefighters in the Capitol. And Tucker did a segment on him. And I don't know if you remember this. And he just does this outburst where he says, "Look at Jon Stewart, too short to date." And that sounds bizarre, but that's like a verbatim quote. Like,
the famous Jon Stewart looks like a homeless mental patient. He's shrieking and disheveled and very short, really short, too short to date.
Too short to date. And it was really just funny. Like bizarre.
Well, I mean, the root of that, right?
Why? No.
Well, I mean, Jon Stewart is like responsible for like the biggest career setback. Tucker.
Yeah.
No, right, Jon Stewart like definitely lives rent free in Tucker's head. I mean, so Jon Stewart came on Crossfire in 2004.
Yeah.
And I mean, he got the show canceled. He attacked Tucker. He attacked Paul Begala. He said they were bad for America. There was a studio audience at Crossfire at that point. And at one point, Stewart calls Tucker a dick, and the audience starts applauding, like they're cheering him on. And CNN canceled Crossfire not long after that. Tucker lost his job at CNN. I mean, it was like a true humiliating experience.
What I was going to ask is, in his bow tie era on TV, did you see the flashes of that same kind of mean?
No.
Asshole? Okay.
No, not really, because Tucker was like such a product of Washington and of the sort of political and media establishments there that he was friends with everybody. I mean, that actually is a huge difference from him today versus back then, when he was very much like part of the scene. And and then one of the things I think he loved about Crossfire was that it was like he was hosting this party and everybody had to come through and they were all friends, and Tucker is like this incredibly social creature, and so he loved hanging out in the green room and hanging out afterwards and going out drink and go out for steaks or whatever. And like he was like this sort of maitre d' almost, and anything you said on the air would not be carried over to off air. Like he was really good friends with Carville and Begala. They would yell at each other for an hour and then they would go get dinner together. And I mean, that was what made the Stewart thing so shocking, was Stewart wasn't in on the act, like he came in like truly hating these guys, and he wasn't going to like, sort of pull his punch, engage in like the pro wrestling kind of, fighting that was what Crossfire was about. Like he came in and he was really, and that's why they were so unprepared for it. Like they didn't think he was actually going to like take real, land real punches. And it continued off air. So yeah, so Tucker wouldn't. I mean, there's no one he would really do that to because it was all play acting. They were all still friends.
And who decided for him to wear the bow tie?
As I understand it, that was something he started doing in like, if not in prep school, in college, as kind of an homage to George Will, because he liked watching George Will on This Week with David Brinkley. And Tucker went to Trinity College in Hartford, which is actually where George Will went, even though George Will kind of like, I think, sort of associated more with Princeton, where he did his PhD. He also went to Trinity. And I think Tucker sort of started wearing that, as kind of like, he was already a preppy dude, but this kind of took it up another level. And I guess it was inspired by George Will.
Whoever told him to stick with it, to never, or like not to, well, maybe he did mix it up, but it
was always, but, and then, that was what he wore off air. Like it wasn't
it was real marketing genius because it made him, he was literally like, and I was pretty young at the time of the bow tie era, but he literally like I never heard him talk, but I knew the guy visually as like he was like some kind of character out of like one of the conservative students in Animal House or something. It was like there was something very if he was giving a passionate rant on like policy in 2002 or 2004, what would it be on?
He was like mildly libertarian, I guess, and that was sort of where the contrarianism came in. But he had to tamp that down, I think, on air. But I could sort of see him. I'm trying to remember sort of various segments. I mean, he was like very anti-PC. If there was like some case of like, say, like a high school teacher, like a female teacher, who had like sex with a student, let's say she was being like prosecuted, be like, why are you prosecuting her? That's every boy's dream, something like that. That would be his boundary pushing, right? Like it would not be that, immigrants are dirtying America. He would not say that. Like, he was kind of naughty, but like in a much more sort of restrained way. And then like in the run up to Iraq, he was very much going after the surrender monkeys in France and sort of attacking liberals for being opposed to the war and portraying them as weak and hysterical and things like that. Those would be the rants.
The one thing I've noticed, even before it was clear to me that he was evil, was I remember it was probably like 2016, 2017. I remember listening to Rachel Maddow talk about Tucker Carlson. And it was really striking because she was like, basically, I don't like him, but she was basically like, he was like really nice to me as a person, and like basically had been really nice to her beyond seeing.
I mean, she owes her career to him to a large degree. I mean, he was the one who, plucked her audition tape out of a pile when he had a show after Jon Stewart blew him up at CNN. He went to MSNBC where he had a show, and he needed to have a debate partner. He needed kind of a liberal to spar with. And I think one of his lessons from CNN was to have like real intelligent debate and don't do this sort of partisan hackery. So he needed to find a liberal who was actually smart and could kind of keep up with him. And he wanted Maddow to be that person. And at that point, Maddow she was on Air America. She was a radio host. And the MSNBC executives didn't think she'd be good on television and didn't want her. And he fought for her and got her on the air, and that, and everything, the rest of the story, obviously. So, and I'm not sure about the interview you're referring to, but like, I mean, they're still friends. Like, I mean, I think she likes him quite a lot personally.
Still?
Yeah. And I mean, as far as I know, I mean, she wouldn't talk to me for the book, but she doesn't talk about him publicly at all.
Yeah.
Because, as I understand it, like, they're still friends.
Well, yeah, but I was going to say, like, I heard Mickey Koss, the blogger, once talk about Tucker. What is so funny? Oh,
that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Yeah. Anyways, his thing was similar. It was like, he treated me so well at the Daily Caller. It's like, there seems to be, What is he?
Tucker was a great boss.
Yeah,
Everybody who's ever worked for him, even the people who, hold him in very low regard today, everybody, and, not just as a boss, but just as a colleague. And, and just as, I mean, I can just say as someone who, has talked to him over the years as a journalist, talking to a source, like incredibly friendly, generous with his time, very funny, very personable, like someone you would look forward to talking to.
Funny because he laughs a lot now at his own stuff. It's not that funny anymore, but maybe he was. But
yeah, he was very funny.
What? So is he different from how he appears on camera behind the scenes?
No, it's pretty consistent, as at least in my experience. Yeah, there's not. I mean, yeah, there doesn't seem to be a huge gap. I mean, I think people look. He obviously has to trim his sails a little bit in public. I mean, you saw what he was kind of writing about Trump back after the 2020 election. He was not saying that explicitly on air, but at the same time, if you watch that show and compared it to the other Fox shows, like an intelligent viewer would recognize that he was angry at Trump and he wasn't, going to back him the way, say, Sean Hannity was going to. Yeah, I don't think there's like a huge distance there.
So are there like certain moments in shaping who he becomes the most striking?
Yeah. Well, so like the book that I wanted to write was not a biography per se, because like I don't think Tucker Carlson like warrants a biography. He's not that interesting. He's not that important. He's interesting and he's kind of important, but he's not that interesting.
I hope he's not that important.
Yeah. So I did not sort of, the book really sort of begins like in 1995 when he gets hired at the Weekly Standard. And obviously, I wanted to sort of like explain how we got to that point, but it's a very small part of the book. But if you were going to do like a true, like, a real biography of him, I mean, the seminal event is his mother leaving the family when he's like 5 years old and him never seeing her again. I mean, that's the rosebud, I think, if you were going to write that kind of book about Tucker, because that has to affect anyone. So, he grew up with his father, like as, kind of a single dad for a long time, which was very unusual in the 1970s. And his dad is like his dad passed away, I think last year, but his dad was just a great character. I mean, he was a television journalist for a while, eventually like ran for mayor. He was an anchorman in San Diego. If you've ever seen the movie Anchorman with Will Ferrell,
yes,
like that kind of character. So much so that when that movie came out, some of like his friends thought that it was modeled on Dick Carlson. It wasn't. It turns out it was modeled on like a Cleveland anchorman.
Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit. That's right. Yeah, Detroit. But there was a lot of overlap. So he was that kind of character, and eventually he got a job in the Reagan administration. He was the ambassador to the Seychelles. He ran Voice of America. Eventually he became the head of Corporation of Public Broadcasting. But his influence on Tucker's life and the absence of his mom, I think, would be kind of the big kind of moments or events in his development.
Was he born in California?
Yes, he was born in California and raised in California until his teens, when they moved to DC because his dad got this job in the Reagan administration. And then he got shipped off to prep school, and he went to prep school in Rhode Island. He is a pure product of California. And and he talks about, it's funny, like he's kind of retconned his California upbringing, and he tells this story about one of the reasons he's conservative is because he was rebelling against the liberal kind of hippie California environment that he grew up in. And I don't think that's actually right. I mean, his mom was like an heiress from a very prominent no, so that's his stepmom.
Okay.
His mom was a descendant of the Miller family.
Miller family.
Yeah, and she, I think, she became kind of like a bit of a hippie and got into drugs, and like they lived in Laurel Canyon when he was really young, and like she was hanging out with like the Eagles and like David Hockney and stuff like that. But then once she was out of the picture, he was, being raised by his dad, and they were in San Diego, which was a military town back then. And his dad was really good friends with Pete Wilson. It was a very, and Tucker was like hanging out at the La Jolla Country Club. Like he was in a very kind of
Nixon walking
yeah,
around?
Nixon's California. So the story that he tells about him kind of rebelling against all the hippies, like I think that's not quite accurate. I think when his mom was in the picture, he probably saw some stuff, but once she was gone, it was a pretty conservative. I mean, like his little brother is named Buckley, who is named after William F. Buckley. I mean, his dad was like pretty conservative.
Yeah,
and they were living in a very conservative place.
Now I'm really seeing the scene now. I'm seeing the California and him and his dad, and your mother is on tour with the Eagles. Right?
Yeah. No, and I think that was, sort of part of the reason for like the dissolution of the marriage. I think the mom became, pretty unreliable. Like, I mean, you read the divorce documents, and, the dad is, I mean, yeah, the dad got like sole custody, which is unusual back then. And I think one of his arguments was that the mom was, abusing alcohol and drugs, and just was not, wouldn't be safe for the kids.
I wish your mother wanted to be a mother, but she just wants to be a groupie for David Crosby or something.
That I could imagine things like that were probably said. Yeah.
So let's just dive into it. He becomes a weekend host for Fox News, right? The morning. Have you gone back and looked at those shows?
Yeah. I looked at everything. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
When he returns back in that role, is he awkward, or what strikes you?
He was enthusiastic. I mean, so he gets fired from CNN. He goes to MSNBC. He gets fired from MSNBC. He's at, basically like a total nadir. When he was at those two networks, he used to talk a lot of shit about Fox. And Roger Ailes, after he gets fired from MSNBC, after Tucker gets fired from MSNBC, Roger Ailes reaches out to him and offers him this contributor contract at Fox. And as it was explained to me by people who were at Fox at the time and knew Ailes, like the reason Ailes did that is one of the reasons he did that is because he wanted to humiliate Tucker. Like he liked being able to sort of like take this guy when he was, at the absolute bottom and sort of put him in his place and be like, you're going to, I mean, he told Tucker in like their conversation when he hired him, like, I'm hiring you because you're a fucking loser and you've like screwed up your life. And I know that, you're going to work your ass off for me. And the thing is, Tucker did. So like Ailes, Tucker, I think wanted, when he got the Fox gig, he got this contributors contract, which was not a big thing after having anchored a couple primetime shows at these other two networks. He's doing dayside cable hits. I mean, I think his hope was that he could be on Special Report, which, was first the Brit Hume and then the Brett Baer kind of, that's like the prestige TV at Fox. They're sort of I think it's 6 p.m. Yeah. And they had this all-star panel, which, back then was like Charles Krauthammer and Bill Kristol and, kind of like people I think Tucker sort of considered his intellectual equals. And he was, I think, hoping that he would get to be on that. And, as I understand it from others, like Roger Ailes was not going to let him be on that because he wanted to humiliate Tucker. And so the job that Ailes gave him was the weekend anchor of Fox and Friends, which was, like weekday Fox and Friends was stupid. Like weekend Fox and Friends was even dumber. And not only was it dumb and kind of embarrassing, like you had to do like cooking demonstrations and like ride go-karts on the set and stuff like that. It was also in New York. So Tucker lived in Washington and he had to like leave his family and leave his whole social circle and spend the weekend in New York. And, I think it was fairly miserable. Like he would just kind of sit in his hotel room and tie fishing flies, and then go walk to Central Park and go fishing in Central Park. But if you watch him on air, you would never know that. He was like an incredibly good sport and super enthusiastic and did all the dumb stuff they asked him to do. I mean, the hour was hard for him, waking up that early. Like at one point he fell asleep on air. But, other than that, like you would think that he liked it. And he was a good soldier.
I'm thinking back to that era, and he was sort of a forgotten figure in a way.
Oh yeah, it was a nowhere job. He was running the Daily Caller at the time, which is a whole nother part of this story. But in terms of his place in the cable news landscape, he was like a third or fourth string figure at Fox.
Yeah, so I do have to rewind because this show is called Public Research, and I believe in that. So I need to know who his insiders are. So tell me about who's Neil Patel? Or is that how you say his name?
Yeah, that's how you say his name. So Neil is his best friend. They met, I think, on their first day at Trinity. They started as freshmen at Trinity at the same time, and I think got drunk together, and then sort of realized that they were, kindred spirits politically and personally, and that's been his best friend since then. And I think like outside of his father who's now gone and his wife, I think, and I guess his brother, I think Neil probably knows him better than anyone. Neil he went to law school, and then he wound up working as a lawyer for Scooter Libby, who then became Dick Cheney's chief of staff, and Neil kind of sort of became Scooter Libby's chief of staff during the Bush administration. And so, one of the reasons Tucker got Iraq wrong, I mean, he was supporting it in part because he had to in his role as Crossfire, and the other reason he was supporting it was because Neil Patel, who was intimately involved in, crafting the rationale for the war, was assuring him that Iraq had WMD and the like. So at the end of the Bush administration, which was around the time that Tucker was fired from MSNBC, they were both kind of looking for something to do, and together they started the Daily Caller. So they did the Daily Caller together. Neil was on the business side, Tucker was the editorial, and now today, they run Tucker's media company together. Neil is the business guy. Tucker's obviously
and he's
the
Indian American.
Yes, yeah, his parents, I think, were both doctors. I think he was born in London, maybe, but he grew up like in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I think both of his parents were MDs. I think educated abroad, but then practiced in the United States.
So let's begin the Fox era, because I've been thinking about this a lot now. This is just my opinion. I think he's just totally evil, Father Coughlin of our era. And when do you start seeing flashes? I mean, because I was thinking back on it, and it's like the Heritage Americans thing. That's like one thing. And then, somebody was reminding me that he did these spots on Paul Singer. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. And Sydney, Nebraska is like, and then Zelensky's like rat-like, and the Chirons are, he hates Christians.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of dog whistles. Yeah.
Let's talk about the classic Tucker era. What did you think about him at that time?
Well, so I think all of that stuff goes back to Iraq. I mean, I think, so he supports Iraq full-throatedly or wholeheartedly, whatever the expression is. At the same time, he has all these private doubts that he kind of pushes aside. Very early into the war, he, realizes it's a grave error, and he actually goes to Iraq. He gets an assignment for Esquire to go write about it. I think this is like 7 months into the war, and comes back and says this is a disaster, and becomes really, I think, maybe the first kind of prominent conservative commentator who supported the war to admit that he was wrong and to kind of disavow his support and declare this a disaster, and actually talked about it very similarly to now how he's talking about, supporting Donald Trump and what a mistake he'd made. And I think something really important happened when that occurred. I mean, he didn't only, say that he was wrong. He did, I think, in a fairly admirable way, actually tried to grapple with why he was wrong, which is something that so few people who supported that war did. I mean, first of all, like a lot of them never actually admitted they were wrong. Those who did, I don't think ever really kind of fully tried to grapple with why they were wrong, in part because they really suffered no professional consequences for it. But Tucker did. And I think it made him not only reevaluate like why he was wrong about Iraq, but like reevaluate why he was all these other things. Like Tucker, his heroes at that point were Bill Kristol, like John McCain, and his father, all three of whom were, kind of neocons. I mean, his dad, that's kind of what he was. And I think Tucker sort of started to wonder, okay, they were wrong about Iraq. Like, what else were they wrong about? And, at the Weekly Standard, where Tucker had worked before CNN, like one of their biggest projects was reading Pat Buchanan out of the conservative movement. They were, the neocons hated the paleocons. And so I think Tucker started to say, okay, like, not only what were these people I admired, what were they wrong about? And what are these people I've been told are wrong about everything? What are they right about? And Buchanan became this really, important figure to him, and not just on foreign policy. And I think a lot of the stuff you see today with the Jewish, question, like a lot of that goes back to Buchanan. But the thing that was interesting when I was doing the book was like going back and reading the transcripts of his MSNBC show, which he was doing from like, I think like 2005 to like 2008. And first of all, he had Buchanan on as a guest a lot. It was funny. It was like him and Buchanan and Rachel Maddow going back and forth about immigration, in 2005, and Tucker sort of saying like, we need to build a wall, on the border with Mexico. So like a lot of this stuff goes back that far, but I think that's where it starts. And that's where you kind of see his turn towards paleoconservatism. Like that goes back to the aftermath of the Iraq War. And so the things when you talk about like Paul Singer and stuff like that, I think that's, it's sort of, the roots of it are back in that era.
It's funny. I grew up watching McLaughlin Group with my dad. Do you remember McLaughlin Group?
I remember the Saturday Night Live parody better than the show itself. But I do remember it, yeah.
But do you remember Buchanan on it?
Yeah.
Eleanor Cliff and Clifford Page. And it was only when I read John Ganz's book, When the Clock Broke, and he quoted those Buchanan columns, and I was like shocked by that.
Amen corner.
Because I'd grown up with him on the McLaughlin Group, and I never, maybe I was an idiot, but I'd never seen that. He hadn't really done, he didn't do that as much on TV. Well, he's a very kind of like nice, honorable.
Well, there's that Gary Wills quote about Buchanan, right? About like, never is like a fanatic been so likable or something like that. And I think there's something very similar with Tucker. I mean, I really do. I think the Buchanan parallels, I think, really hold, because Tucker similarly was someone he was hard to dislike personally, the same way Buchanan was.
But Buchanan, I've like you go back, watch his Culture War speech in '92.
Yeah.
The rioting was still going on, and two of them walked up a dark street where the mob had burned and looted every single building on the block but one, a convalescent home for the aged. And the mob was headed in to ransack and loot the apartments of the terrified old men and women inside. The troopers came up the street, M16s at the ready, and the mob threatened and cursed. But the mob retreated because it had met the one thing that could stop it: force rooted in justice and backed by moral courage.
It doesn't like give me the icks as much as, I mean, it's like beautifully written, the ending where he's like, the soldiers had to protect the old people, and he's like, and they ran out there because the only thing between, he doesn't disgust me like Tucker does. Anyways.
Well, I think the bar has been lowered too in terms of public discourse. But I think Tucker's still like conducting it at a higher level than a lot of other people, even if you disagree with them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I won't convince you.
No, I mean, what is the public level? It's probably, I guess, a Twitch streamer who's like,
he's more articulate than Hassan
Piker.
Oh,
Cat. That's Cat, bro. Yeah. So he's at Fox, and at that time, were you subjecting yourself to watching him regularly, or what?
No. I mean, like the dirty. I mean, I hate cable news. Like, I do not watch it ever. That said, if I did have to watch a cable news show, I would have watched Tucker, because it was honestly like it was unpredictable. I mean, he was and he's his monologues were really something. I mean, they were I disagreed with like a lot of what he was saying in them and was offended by some of what he was saying in them, but you can't, at least to me, like I couldn't deny the talent that was there. Whereas, someone like Sean Hannity is just like a hack, or, there's Tucker at least is like intelligent and, and talented and super talented. Yeah. And so, and genuinely funny. Like there were moments on his Fox show that like, there's very little I think I'd watch on cable news where I would laugh out loud, and like the few instances that's happened, like they were probably things that Tucker said.
I remember the sort of prime of his influence on Fox was during that wild summer of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, that was well that yeah, and he was like he went negative on Trump. I mean, that was, before this most recent, dust up, like Trump had lost him by the summer of 2020. I mean, he was mad about COVID. He was mad that Trump wasn't cracking down on the Black Lives Matter protesters. Off air, he was telling everyone that he was sick of Trump and Trump was a failure. On the air, he didn't quite go that far, but if you read between the, he would attack Trump from the right. He attacked him for not cracking down on the BLM protesters. And you could sort of read between the lines, like what he was thinking. But yeah, he was sort of articulating, he was kind of articulating sort of the Trump message that came to define at least the first year of his second presidency, I think. That, authoritarian, kind of, strongman vision of the presidency.
So Fox era Tucker is like, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it's like heavy focus on anti-immigration. We got to save the West. It's being destroyed type stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty, he starts saying heritage Americans. He's getting really kind of
sort
bold.
of the embattled white American was a big part of it.
Yeah.
Very anti-free trade, and anti-intervention. But in all things that Trump said he supported, but Tucker would always couch it in terms of the issues, not Trump himself. And if he felt Trump deviated or wasn't doing enough on these things, he was not afraid to criticize Trump. It was very different from like the Hannity show or the Laura Ingraham show, which basically was just cheerleading whatever Trump did. There was no kind of ideological consistency to them. I mean, a little bit, but for the most part, they just existed to cheer on Trump. Tucker was very careful to kind of distinguish between Trump the man and Trump sort of the ideas, such as they were. And and that continued to off air too. Like he resisted having an off air relationship with Trump in a way that very few other people at Fox did, who loved, having access to the Oval Office and loved to be able to call Trump and were flattered when Trump would call them. Like when Trump would call Tucker sometimes would let it go to voicemail. He was just very wary of becoming too personally close to Trump. I think he had the sense that, if you got too close to Trump, you would be destroyed by it. Things would go badly for you, which is so ironic considering what's happening now.
And he was recording his show from Maine?
No, he was mostly originally he was in Washington.
Oh yeah, during COVID probably that's when.
So he has this home in Maine that he's had forever, and he would go spend the summers there. And I think once he got big enough at Fox built him a studio up there, but until he was, really established there as like this, this huge star in primetime, he was doing it from Washington, which is where he lived at the time. He left Washington, I think in like late 18 or early 19 after these protesters came to his house and like scared the shit out of his wife. And it was bad. And then, Washington just became like inhospitable to him. I mean, he had until Trump, like he had been sort of the, kind of like, I think I say in the book, like the invited skunk to the garden party. Like he was the person that, liberal political people in Washington would have to their dinner parties because he was sort of a contrarian, but he was like, very much part of like the scene. Like he was friends with Hunter Biden. And once Trump came along and once Tucker became identified with Trump, like his place in Washington's social world became untenable. Like he was having a hard, he was getting accosted at the Palm or at the dog park. And then the final straw was this protest at his house. And that's when he moved to Maine and then bought a house in Florida and, now splits his time between Florida and Maine, but really removed himself from kind of the Washington, like social scene and the media and political elite scene there, which he was very much a part of. And now, he's completely sort of divorced from that and alienated from it. And he lives in this totally different world and very much a bubble, the kind of a MAGA bubble.
Somebody told me when he was at Fox that he simply did not cover Israel. Is that true?
He dealt with it glancingly, and I think he wanted to, but I think he also recognized that was going to be a no-go with the Murdochs. I mean, he was constantly like pushing the boundaries at Fox and usually like crossing lines that have been drawn for him and never actually getting in trouble for them. But I think the Israel one was one he was careful about. I mean, again, like plenty of dog whistles, but nothing like today.
So, and it seemed like, yeah, so anti-immigration, anti-intervention, anti-free trade, those were like sort of mainstays of the show. And then it seemed like one other mainstay of the show was basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, like sort of like him getting revenge on, often Jewish editors and writers back from his magazine days that he had like grudges on, Bill Crystal and David Frum and
Yeah.
all these people,
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say in Tucker's defense, but
maybe.
I mean, those were the. I mean, the thing was, like, I mean, the world he grew up in those magazines was like very Jewish.
Yeah.
Like, but he used to call himself an Episcopalian neocon.
Right,
he would sort of make the joke. So, I mean, I felt like with like Paul Singer, and Bill Ackman, like, so he would make this like to me like fairly like compelling critique of private equity.
Yeah.
But then the only times he would actually bash like a finance person by name, it was Paul Singer or Bill Ackman. Like there are other like finance guys who aren't Jewish. In the case of like Crystal and Frum and those guys, like one, he knew them personally and they kind of loomed large in his mind. But two, I mean, they were sort of like the obvious targets.
Yeah, but I what I remember is how sort of vicious. Like he was
it was super personal. Max Boot too.
Yeah.
Well, the Crystal thing is, and I mean, like it's not to get like too in the weeds, but like I think one of the reasons he went after Singer was because like Singer was a big financier of Crystal's efforts at the time, and was financing the Free Beacon, which is run by Bill Crystal's son-in-law. It was sort of a way to get at Crystal, like dinging Singer. But in Tucker's mind, and this is the story that Tucker tells, not other people, but also himself, is that when he was at the Weekly Standard, he was used and manipulated by Bill Crystal and by the neocons and, sort of tricked into doing their bidding in terms of like attacking Pat Buchanan or supporting the Iraq War, and after when he was older, kind of the scales fell from his eyes and he was able to see what they had done with him. And now he's sort of making amends for that. He's like making amends for becoming this pawn of Bill Crystal and harming the white working class. And that like really is, I think, the way he can kind of rationalize all this stuff. So I think Crystal is like a really central character in his own sort of the story that he tells about, the journey that he's traveled.
He says he was a pawn?
Yeah, pretty much.
Really?
Because he was young and he didn't know any better. Yeah,
wow.
He was just, that's why. The Crystal stuff is. I mean, it's fascinating. I don't think. I mean, Crystal was like a very important like figure in his professional life. I mean, he was a mentor for him for a long time, a mentor to him for a long time. But now the story that Tucker tells is very different, and he's completely retconned their relationship. He talks about how Bill Crystal hated Christians. It's just like hilarious, like considering, like he used to go vacationing with like Gary Bauer. But, it's funny, like when I did the book, like I went to like, Crystal and Brooks and all those guys who were, Jewish and worked with him at the Standard and, asked like, was there anything you saw back then that, now with the benefit of hindsight, you could be like, oh, I can sort of see like this was sort of like an incident where you could sort of see some of the animus towards like Jews or Israel. And they all like honestly say like, no, I don't know where this came from. So take that for what's worth.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because it wasn't clear to me. There's a text message Jonah Goldberg sends to Tucker Carlson, and he's basically saying, hey, this guy you had on your show is like a huge fan of Nazi Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, Nick Fuentes, yeah.
And it says, Carlson sent Goldberg a text in response threatening to destroy him. And I had to read that over and over.
And just sort of like, I think sort of saying like, don't pick this fight with me, or, I'll go nuclear on you.
Whoa. Did that like shock Jonah Goldberg?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
As I understand it.
In the research process, what were the most important interviews for you?
I mean, like to me, I thought the most interesting sort of chapter in the book and therefore maybe the most interesting interviews was about the Daily Caller. Because like I think people like kind of overlook the Daily Caller and all of this because, it was first of all, like what Tucker wanted it to be, he had this idea that it was going to be this sort of like fact-based conservative version of the New York Times or maybe the Huffington Post on a bad day. And that's not what it became, because he realized very quickly that there was no audience for that, and he had to shift, and he turned it into this kind of rag, this sort of like, Breitbart light. And it lost to Breitbart, right? Breitbart was the more influential magazine among like the alt-right, but it wasn't for like lack of trying on the Daily Caller's part. And Tucker at the Caller, I think, was able to, he gained an understanding of what the conservative base wanted that was like incredibly valuable to him when he was making his move at Fox. Because, when Donald Trump was first running for president, like most conservative pundits dismissed him as a sideshow and someone who had no prayer of winning. Because, the operating theory at the time among mainstream conservative pundits was, after the Romney campaign and the Romney defeat in 2012, like Republicans needed to moderate, and they had to moderate on social issues and, strike a grand bargain on immigration and all of these things, and Jeb Bush was the embodiment of this theory. And Tucker, because of his experience at the Standard, I think at the Daily Caller, just literally looking at like web traffic numbers, like understood that like conservative voters, they liked this anti-immigration stuff. They liked this, anti-free trade stuff. And, they had like, this sort of grievance politics would work. And it made him be open to the possibility that Trump would be successful. And that wound up being, by dint of the fact that Fox needed to produce debate segments about Trump, and they couldn't find anyone to sort of take the pro-Trump side, or at least the Trump agnostic side, like Tucker started getting more airtime that way. But I think, the thing about Tucker, especially over these last 10 years, is he has had a really good political radar. Like, he's been really smart about recognizing where conservatism is going and kind of staying a half step ahead of it. I think a lot of that dates back to the the Caller. And so just talking to all the people who worked with him there and kind of sort of getting into his own head at that point and seeing the change, seeing his ideas about what worked. I mean, this idea that, the articles that were really successful at the Standard weren't necessarily like the ones that were conservative. In some instances, they were just the ones that attacked liberals, or the ones that would piss off liberals, like kind of recognizing like the trolling nature of politics, which is so important today. Like a lot of that just dates back to this website that like everyone's forgotten about and no one really read, but it was super important in terms of his own formation.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I sort of heard him do long interviews. I remember very distinctly. 2008, I think. He did a rally with Ron Paul.
Yes, the convention at the,
Yeah, and then I remember I saw him like with Alex Jones like a few years later.
Yeah.
And he was rebranding. And then I remember I heard him a little bit after that, maybe 2011 or something, on Adam Carolla's podcast.
Huh.
And by then he had fully formed the like Buchananite thing.
Yeah.
And I saw, okay. I could see what was going on there. But you're saying he had already become evil Tucker. That's my phrase, sorry. Evil Tucker when he was on Fox, but he was, what did the Nazis say? Hiding his power levels? Is that how they phrase it?
You mean like on the Israel question?
Yeah. I mean,
I think a lot of that stuff, he's freer to say it now than he was at Fox. But certainly on the race stuff and on the immigration stuff, it was,
Oh, yeah.
On the Israel stuff, I think he kept that a little bit more under wraps.
Oh, yeah. He kept the whole Jewish...
Well, except when it comes to like using Paul Singer and Bill Ackman as your stand-ins.
Yeah, but that was like...
Not to defend Bill Ackman, but...
That was, but by the end with the Zelensky, when he started
rat-like, persecutes Christians, that stuff. Although I think that was, I don't think he called Zelensky rat-like at Fox, did he? I think that was after he left Fox that he actually used the rat-like.
I do remember
pejorative.
He had those chyrons where like Zelensky declares war on Christianity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was the anti. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's discuss this big shift that happens. And I'm just going to say it. Rupert Murdoch's a white hat. He's a white hat. He's a good guy. He got rid of Tucker. And I think that was a selfless move because I think, You know, if they only cared about keeping Fox relevant, they wouldn't give it to Jesse Waters. I mean, like, who's paying attention to Jesse Waters? Like,
His
so
ratings are just as good as Tucker's.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
That's funny. You don't see.
But that's the thing.
online.
Fox is I mean, Fox did not suffer for getting rid of Tucker. Like the thing that's different about Tucker is Tucker didn't suffer for leaving Fox. Like that's the new twist. Normally, when you leave Fox, if you're like Bill O'Reilly or Megyn Kelly or Glenn Beck, like you kind of disappear. Tucker's like the first one to leave Fox and survive. But Fox is such a machine. You know, I mean, Ailes used to say, you know, I could put a dead raccoon in that time slot and it would do better than last year. And he's, you know, I think he was right. And I think Jesse Waters might be like the good sort of example of that. Because I think Jesse Waters' ratings are just as good as Tucker's.
Well, I'm still going to call Rupert Murdoch a white hat.
Right, I'm not going to comment on that either.
Salute to you, Rupert. Thank you for firing Tucker. So, but then he gets off, he starts his own show, and we see a big shift.
Yeah.
Where he's like, I'm done with this immigration stuff. It's just Jews, Israel.
No, the immigration stuff's still part of it,
yeah,
though.
still,
I mean,
is it?
Yeah, well, maybe not. Like a little more recently, within the last 9 months or so, I think Israel has come to define everything. But before that, I mean, immigration was still a pretty big part of it.
So, but the shift, and I think somebody posted a clip. Did he say recently, Islam and Christianity believe in love for everyone, but Judaism doesn't?
I think what we're seeing is evil. Like, are you allowed to kill people who've committed no crime? No. Super simple. You're not allowed to do that. Under no moral standard is that allowable. All of a sudden it's allowable. It's allowable in Gaza, and our leaders are like, yeah, no, it's just totally fine. It's not fine. But it's repugnant to the Christian understanding of the world and the human soul. Every person has a soul. That's the Christian view, and not just the Christian view, it's the Islamic view too. So, and it's my...
I don't know if he said exactly that, but he
Something like
definitely will leave Judaism out of the religions that, are being offended. So yeah. His new love of Islam is interesting.
So let's jump into some of the, I guess, conspiracy theories about him and the shift he has. I mean, there's this amazing clip. Have you seen it where somebody alerts him that Qatar had? You remember when Iran lobbed that weak missile at Qatar after the June strike?
Mm-hmm.
And there's that clip, and his producer tells him about it, and then Tucker goes he puts his hand on his heart, and he's like, oh, I feel so bad. Have you haven't seen that?
I don't think I've seen that. No.
Oh, okay. It's really remarkable. He's like, so, my heart.
We have some breaking news.
What now?
Well, this is just sad on every level. Explosions have been heard over Doha, Qatar, after Iran launched a missile attack on the U.S. base there. That base exists to protect Israel, by the way. I know Barry Weiss is constantly attacking Qatar. Qatar has done more to defend Israel. But anyway, hosting this base, which they don't need at all. It's the richest country in the world. They don't need to do it. They're doing it to be nice. But anyway, sorry. This is so distressing.
Well, he loves Qatar now. Yeah. I mean, he's going to buy a house there.
However, tomorrow buying a place in Qatar.
He said.
Okay, so he does go to fundraise
I don't know. I mean, he goes over there a lot. I know there's this conspiracy theory that he's bankrolled by Qatar and stuff. I could not find anything in my reporting that backed that up. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I could not prove that. He now owns his media company. He had investors like Omid Malik, I think was one of the biggest ones, but he got $15 million to launch it. But him and Neil bought, they paid off their investors and they bought it back. So they own it now. I think it's probably worth, reporters looking into that, because his love of the Gulf states is definitely new and weird. I mean, because he used to be a huge critic of them. I mean, and a critic of them on aesthetic grounds, talking about these, he was the same way he was repulsed by Trump's kind of, taste in all the gold and stuff, and would say, he has the mentality of an innkeeper. I mean, same aesthetic as, Dubai. But now he loves it over there, I guess. It's interesting.
Can you tell me about Omed Malik?
Um, not any more than you probably can read about him. I mean, he's just, he's a guy who's very much at the center of MAGA, and he Don Jr. is part of his investment firm, and he's like investing in all these, conservative businesses. He used to be kind of a mainstream Wall Street guy, and I think a Democrat, and then had a fall from grace, I think, during the Me Too stuff, and has, kind of reemerged as this, extremely important conservative financier.
It's called 1789.
1789, yeah, that's his venture
Capital.
fund.
And it's with Rebecca Mercer, the daughter of the super wealthy.
Yeah, who funded
Is he
Breitbart.
still alive? Wait.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So I just want to clear this up because I think because of Malik's background, I think he's Pakistani Iranian. People assume this is the Muslim financier that made Tucker hate Israel or something.
Yeah, I think people are
just
reading a lot
that.
into his ethnicity. Yeah, I don't think that's who he is, as I understand it.
Do you have any idea what's his view on Israel and stuff like that?
I do not. No. I mean, I remember there was an interesting profile of him in the Free Press, I think, which Tucker talked for, and Tucker, sort of, I'm speaking from memory here, but Tucker sort of Tucker talked to the reporter and basically tried to put distance between himself and Malik about Israel, basically, sort of saying he doesn't believe the stuff that I say about Israel. I'm saying that's me. I don't know what he thinks about it, which I thought was fascinating that Malik got Tucker to give that interview to the Free Press, which has, been quite critical of Tucker. I mean, Barry White, Tucker, Barry Weiss, he thinks she's Mossad or whatever. But clearly, I think Malik does not want to be associated with Tucker's views on Israel. And I think that, if you think about Tucker, if you think about the world that Malik operates in, which is MAGA, you think about Miriam Adelson, people like that, Tucker's views on Israel don't really work in that world.
Yeah, it's actually that fund. I assumed it was pretty small, but it's pretty big, and they're doing a deal with Anthropic. So
yeah, no, they got a lot of money.
So, but he does get paid by Qatar to interview the PM, right?
Well, I mean, I think they probably pay for him to come over there.
Oh, okay.
I have no idea. Maybe he gets paid to do it, but maybe he gets an appearance fee. But the same way Hillary Clinton gets an appearance fee. They're at the same conference. John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Tucker are all at the same conference. Lots of people. Nick Kristof is probably getting paid. I don't know about Nick Kristof, but there's a lot of that.
They pay for plane tickets. Yeah,
it's probably a nice flight too, right?
So you think this is just an organic shift for him?
I mean, I just don't know. I can't.
Stick with the facts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so the people close to him, it's Alex Pfeiffer, Justin Wells. Who are the most?
I don't know if those guys are close to him anymore. I mean, neither one of them works for him anymore. And now that Tucker is at war with Trump, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Have you spoken to Blake Neff?
I talked to him for the book. Yeah.
I'm wondering how he feels since Tucker's embraced Candace Owens, who says that.
I think you can suss out how Blake feels by watching, the Turning Point show.
Well, yeah, I guess I would have to do that.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I think, I think there are a lot of people who were with Tucker during the Fox years, and then during sort of the Trump campaign, the 24 campaign, who are no longer with Tucker. I think who are upset by what he's doing and think he's lost it.
I'm going to ask these they're hard questions. You probably don't know. They're very difficult because I'm just curious. Stephen Miller, is he still close with Tucker?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I actually don't know how any of the people in the White House are with Tucker since he's gone after Trump. I just haven't done any reporting on it.
Yeah.
So I can't say. And I'd imagine, it's so important to those people to maintain their relationship with Trump and to maintain their access to Trump. And Tucker has become such an enemy of Trump that if they are close to Tucker, I doubt they're advertising it.
Anything
And look, and Tucker can come back at some point. Like that's the thing. Like once you're never fully out of Trump world. I mean, you can get let back in if you're willing to like debase yourself enough. And Tucker's living proof of that. I mean, the text messages that came out about, the things he was saying about Trump after the 2020 election, Trump obviously forgave him about those. The same way like Trump forgave JD Vance for equating him to Hitler, right? You can always come back. But I think at the moment, I think there's a lot of anger towards Tucker among Trump people.
So he's basically calling Trump a traitor that's owned by Israel now.
Yeah.
Has that caused any issues for his son Buckley?
Buckley's no longer working for JD Vance.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he left in I think January or December. Yeah.
I did a thing. I took every episode of Tucker and I made a spreadsheet. Okay. Yeah, so I did this. I got every episode.
Mm-hmm.
I even had Claude do a Israel count for every episode, like how many Jews did he attack?
Oh gosh.
Look at this. AIPAC count.
Not a lot of AIPAC, it looks like.
Okay. And I just wanted to sort of scroll this with you because it's sort of amazing what happens. So here he starts off his show.
Mm-hmm.
2023. So he's got the UFC fighter, Colby Covington, Alex Berenson, I assume on some COVID, Greg Abbott, Tony Robbins, Joe Kent, who would return, the Kaylee Means, the anti-vax, Conrad Black, Jordan Peterson, who I don't think like him that much anymore, Russell Brand, Mike Benz, Stella Assange, Bill O'Reilly. Okay, and this was a real statement interview, didn't you think, for him?
The Andrew Tate one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like at that point, I think because he didn't have the Fox platform, he really needed, he needed to stay in the picture. And I think one of the ways he was able to do that was by booking like outrageous guests like Andrew Tate. I think that was a way for him to, kind of maintain his just navigating the attention economy, I think was a big part of it. And I think sort of having someone like Tate on his show was part of that.
I agree with you. It doesn't really matter what he thinks, but I am curious. Like, you would think he's like this educated, intellectual guy. He must be personally know that Andrew Tate is a totally repulsive idiot.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. But at the same time, like Tucker's whole worldview is so much colored now by who his enemies dislike. And I think like, a guy like Tate, all the right people hate him. And so Tucker likes him. I think so much of that is what's driving him these days. And honestly, he's not the only one. I think it drives a lot of people in politics.
Right. Okay, so we're in 2024. We got Naomi Wolf. We got Gina Carano. And I looked at that. And I was like, wow, that's blast from the past. She got fired from that Disney man.
Yeah, but that's like a perfect old school Tucker story, right?
Right.
Yeah, the anti-woke stuff. And
not as scary. Okay, Pastor Doug Wilson. I don't know Bob Abster. Oh, yeah, so now he's going after Zelensky. Yeah, so, and I really want to get into this theme he has, that there's a global war on Christianity. That's one thing. Jeremy Carl, Tucker Max, Tara Reid. Okay. Che Guevara. Okay, that must be a mistake.
It was a seance. Yeah.
It was a seance.
Yeah, this is where you can't trust Claude, huh?
Yeah, this is where it's screwed up. Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Bet-David. Okay, Steve Saylor. That's, probably somebody who's been reading for a long time.
Yeah, certainly.
Matt Taibbi, Ari Shafir, Cernovich. And now here we go. Epstein Demons and Spirituality. This can't be true. The darkness of Eminem's new album?
Oh, that seems plausible.
Okay, that's funny. Okay, interesting. This is the guy who did Replit, Megyn Kelly. Okay, Rob Schneider on SNL. Oh, so it's still normal. Okay. He's got the Telegram guy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now we get into Daryl Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I love the way you described that. You did it perfectly. Because everybody made the headline about he said Churchill's the villain, but you got to what was the most disgusting part of that episode, which was Daryl Cooper saying they killed the Jews because they cared.
Yeah, yeah.
They cared so much about the Jews. And Daryl Cooper is a guy who has said he wishes Hitler won the war, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so he's basically promoting like David Irving Holocaust denial and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was a big thing. That was like, oh my God, he's really going to go far. Elbridge Colby comes on. He's in the Trump administration. Tom Homan, 2024. Chamath. And that's interesting because the All In guys really like him, which is weird. Anyways, Kurt Mills, his protege. Okay. Ray Dalio, one of the biggest billionaire hedge fund managers, comes on. Ernst Roots. Sam Bankman. Have you watched the Bankman Fried one?
I think, yeah, I don't remember it, but yeah, I think I watched it a while ago. Yeah. I think when it came out, I watched it, but I don't really actually remember it all that well.
Okay, now Clayton Morris. Yeah, this is former.
Oh yeah,
Fox
the
host.
Liberty stuff is
Liberty and Douglas McGregor, crackpot.
Yeah.
Then building a Christian refuge. It's time to finally tell the truth about 9/11. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Dan Caldwell. This is when he starts sort of like turning against the Trump administration.
It was more like turning against Hegseth than Trump, I think, at that point. But yeah.
Yeah. And then this is when he starts like bonding with the left. He's got Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's goes on.
Well, that was just over Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, same way he bonds with Glenn Greenwald.
Yeah.
All about Israel and the neocons.
Right. And then at a certain point, it just becomes like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Scott Horton, the Iranian president. This guy is really a nefarious guy. Cigar and Jetty, who gives that interview with Tucker where Tucker says Ben Shapiro doesn't care about America because he was covering Israel too much after October 7th.
Like the level of not just corruption, which I knew, but of like emotional instability and crazy. I mean, there are people on the right who have spent the last 2 months every single day focused on a conflict in a foreign country as our own country becomes dangerously unstable on the brink of financial collapse with tens of millions of people who shouldn't be here in the country. And they're focused with laser intensity on foreign conflicts and they don't care about the country at all. And that's, that's kind of their prerogative. I'm shocked by how little they care about the country, and including the person you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But now Tucker covers Israel a lot. Does he?
Oh
care
yeah,
about
no,
our
Tucker
country?
hates talking about Israel, but that's all he talks about.
I guess he doesn't care about our country. And then we see Anna Kasparian. I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
The Young Turks host.
There's a lot of horseshoe stuff going on here. Yeah.
Okay. And then this Christian stuff. The Christians are being attacked.
Yeah. And he himself has gotten way more religious and not like an Episcopalian sense.
This is when the demons started coming.
Yeah, no, he really seems to believe in the demonology stuff. Obviously, his belief in the Antichrist. If I have one regret about the book, it's that I wish I had done more about his own kind of burgeoning religiosity, because I think it's part of all this.
And here's Nick Fuentes, gives him a softball interview. They talk about how Jews really can't be loyal Americans. Okay. And there's the Qatar guy right there. Mm-hmm. There's another Nazi, Ian Carroll, right there. Matt Gaetz, who's very anti-Semitic. And then his brother, and then Cenk Uyghur, and the Nazi guy again. But look at, Sagar, and the Kerry Prejean Bowler, who's pretty weird on Israel stuff. Joe Kent. And then
the Alex Gibney one was interesting.
Yeah, it was devastating.
Alex Gibney, thank you very much for doing this.
I'm glad TCN is showing BB Files on its network.
Very much, Alex Gibney.
Thank you, Tucker.
I had admired him for years to see him thanking Tucker. Yeah, so here's the latest episode. He's the king of dog whistle. Thomas Massey, battling the treachery of Trump's Republican Party, AIPAC and the Epstein class. Okay, not subtle. And then Tucker responds to Israel's attacks on Jesus Christ. Yeah. What is this thing about this global war on Christians? What is this thing?
Well, I mean, what do you mean? What do you
Well, I
mean?
mean,
He
what-
believes it's happening.
Who's doing it? What is the theory?
I mean, I think Israel is a big part of it.
Israel is doing a global war on Christianity?
Yeah, and just sort of, the nefarious forces that Israel has sort of unleashed on the world, which, I mean, make no sense. Like, Zelensky and Netanyahu are not exactly buddies, but I think in Tucker's, sort of conspiracy theory of what is it, organized Jewry, as Nick Fuentes would call it. These are all things that kind of, share a certain, there's a commonality there.
Okay, I've done you a favor, and I've written your next article for New Yorker. I'm just going to give it to you. And you could just take it, but I made a little thing with ChatGPT for it. Here you go. Here you go. Looks pretty good, right?
Oh, gosh. That really ChatGPT did that?
Yeah.
Huh.
Do you know who those people are? Tommy?
Yeah,
Vietor?
Ro Khanna, Tommy Vietor, and St. Unger, yeah.
Have you seen the clips?
I mean, I saw like the St. Unger interview. I think I've probably seen some of the Pod Save America stuff. I don't know if I've seen.
Gushing about him?
I don't know if they're gushing about him.
I'm a Tucker fan now.
Yeah, it's not a very small thing. I mean, look, look, the problem with Tucker and Israel, to me, look, there are lots of like very legitimate criticisms to be made about Israel, this Israeli government, the influence Israel and Netanyahu have on American foreign policy. I think those are all very real things.
I have no problem with people.
Yeah, and Tucker, if you listen to him, if you listen to the interview he did with Lulu Garcia Navarro for the New York Times, he presents as more reasonable on Israel than I think he actually is. I mean, I think the hostage language that he uses, or the slave language that he uses, I can't remember which term he used in that particular interview. It was loaded, but I don't think he did not say in that interview some of the things he has said on his podcast about Israel, insinuating that, Israel's behind the assassination attempts of Trump and that Trump feels physically threatened by Israel. And that might be one of the reasons he's acting this way. I mean, like just batshit stuff. If you don't hear that from him and you already have kind of an informed, intelligent critique of Israel, you just sort of hear part of what Tucker's saying. Like I can see thinking, and I'm not defending every liberal who has sort of embraced him, but I can see why some do. And I think it's important for people who are maybe a little bit newer to Tucker to kind of recognize that there's a lot underneath the surface there that you do not want to be associated with. And a lot of what is driving his anger at Israel is not sort of the same thing that's driving your anger at Israel. And I think that's an important thing to distinguish.
Yeah, I think the most important question increasingly in U.S. politics is that everybody should ask everybody on every side is, who do you want to win the GOP civil war? Mm-hmm. Team Tucker and Candace or Team Trump? Mm-hmm. Because I've asked people, like the biggest YouTube show on the left, Majority Report.
So Matt, you prefer Tucker take over?
I want to see Zionism lose any subscribers in this country. Yes. So if you want to reduce that to Tucker wins the Republicans, like I guess reduce it that way. I think it's actually an important thing, and I defer to people like Ilan Pape and Avi Shlaim, that it's one thing for the people on the liberal side of the ledger here to lose support for Israel, and it's very good and welcome. But the key pillar right now is on the right, and I want that pillar to collapse.
Mm-hmm. I asked them that. Do you know what they said?
No, they want Tucker.
Which is just shocking to me that is happening. People are saying he's going to run for president. Mm-hmm. Do you think he will?
He seems to be setting himself up to do it. I mean, I don't know if he will or won't, but I did not until the war with Iran, the second war with Iran, I did not foresee a possibility that he would run for president in 2028. I thought he might someday down the line, but I thought he would let the JD Vance stuff play out. And because I think he sort of viewed Vance as his vehicle. His ideological project, Vance could carry out for him, and to a far greater degree than Trump could. I mean, because Vance and he were so sort of consistent with each other and tight with each other. I think the war in Iran has like thrown a real monkey wrench into that, and I think it's made him. I think it's made it much more possible, if not likely, that he would run in 2028. And I think the things he is doing right now are very much consistent with someone who is at least sort of trying to create the possibility that he could run. He's doing things that I think if he decided to run would, it would make it more possible.
I asked my last guest, Andrew Koss, would he leave America if he's Jewish like me, if he would leave America if Tucker was leading in Iowa, and he said absolutely. I mean, there are American Jews who would leave this
I know.
country.
Yeah, there are Republican Jews.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are a lot of, I have been surprised, and I'm Jewish too. I mean, I've been surprised by the genuine fear among Jewish Republicans, Jewish conservatives who I know, who I do not consider to be hysterical people, who are truly worried about what life would be like for Jewish people in the United States if Tucker Carlson were to...
If he was president, would he go beyond the Israel stuff, whatever, he cuts off aid, whatever, but would he do like the thing I think of as that Philip Roth book, The Plot Against America? Mm-hmm. Would he go beyond somehow, do you think?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
How alarmed would you be?
I would be concerned about Jewish life in the United States under a Tucker Carlson administration.
Jason, thank you so much for your work.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.